I'd like to start off by thanking Michael, your president, for asking me to be a guest speaker this evening, and by thanking everybody who's come along to listen to what I have to say. Looking forward to sharing with you some of the memories I have of the Delorean car factory at Demurray. If I can remember that far back, it all happened 50 years ago. So forgive me if I forget one or two things. My name is Gerald Mooney, and I designed and managed the construction of the Delorean car factory at Demurray in Northern Ireland. I was born in Demurray, in the village, in 1943, um, about half a mile from the fields that were to become, 36 years later, the site of the Delorean car factory. As a young boy, I played in these fields and is familiar with all the streams that ran through the site and the very thorn bush that was in the middle of the site. Our structural engineers designed a very large concrete box culvert to contain the streams, but the fairy thorn bush gave them a different kind of problem. Uh, the fairy thorn tree in the Delorean site was known for generations by mill workers in the next village in Hilden. It was said that the mill girls on their way to work very early in the morning had seen fairies dancing around the tree. So when the construction work started on the site, the fairy thorn tree had to be cut down. Irish workers just refused point blank to cut it down. So they had to bring in English workers who didn't believe in the curse of the fairies to cut the tree down. And there's some DMC executives, when they came over for the sword busting ceremony, they were introduced to poaching, which is a bit like American moonshine. And they were ready to believe the curse of the fairies, that anybody who would harm a fairy thorn tree would have a really bad time. So when the final commercial failure of DMC happened, there were people on both sides of the Atlantic that were ready to tell the tale and suggest that the Delorean project was ill-fated from the very start. Modern entrepreneurs are not immune from Celtic magic. I lived most of my working life about a mile from the site, which was very convenient because some of the meetings that DMC called for were 7 o'clock in the morning and sometimes even before that. The production of the Delorean car has now become local history and even folklore. And in many presentations of the history of the Delorean car, that is in writings or in videos or film or social media, you may notice that little mention or credit is given to the designers in the construction of the factory. I have recently attempted to redress this situation, and I'm pleased to tell you that the Lisburn Museum and the Ulster Transport Museum in Northern Ireland have acquired for their archives a set of my drawings and my memoirs about the construction and the design of the Delorean factory. And also the board of a museum at, you may know, Classic DMC in Texas. They're currently considering acquiring a set of the documents. The factory was designed and constructed and completed in 16 months on budget by a local construction professionals to facilitate the ambitions of John Zachary Delorean. This drawing 1133-06 I made in August 78. It's a feasibility layout following about 5 exploratory drawings. And it is a copy of the first published drawing, the initial concept drawing, the birth of the Delorean factory, referred to in my memoirs, the Delorean project. The second drawing, 113308, this drawing shows the elevations of the proposed factory buildings. These were the first images that John Zachary Delorean saw of the factory that would realize his dreams after the disappointments in America, Puerto Rico, and in Dublin. The next drawing, 113328, was made November 78. This is the first working plan showing in detail the proposed layout of the factory buildings, the traffic management, ingress and egress of heavy goods vehicles, and everything necessary to build the car. All the original drawings have my name on it, and the title Delorean, hand printed in the block of these drawings at the bottom right-hand corner. So that identifies them as the beginning of the whole thing. After this, drawings had a standardized DMC logo in the title block in the right corner. You may have seen this elsewhere. The first DMC person I met was Dick Brown. He was a vice president of DMC Limited, and he came over to scope out the site and to prepare for the advance party of the DMC personnel. Dick was a gentleman. He was highly educated, highly intelligent, and very hardworking. We met in the advance pack factory. That's a little factory that was just outside the boundary of the site that was designated for the Delorean factory. So we were pretty handy to what was going on. Dick briefed me on the requirements of the DMC personnel, and I drew up plans to convert this small factory into offices, canteen, utilities, etc., for the DMC personnel. While I was doing this, Dick was working on the logistics and lead-in times for the car production. The car hadn't actually been finally designed at this time, so he had a very difficult task on his hands. And on his last evening, I noticed he was pretty agitated about something, and he told me that he had to produce a wall chart showing the relationship of all the issues relating to the production of the car and the lead-in times required for ordering materials. And he had to have it ready the next day for John Delorean coming at 8 o'clock in the morning. And he couldn't find anybody to draw up the chart for him. So I said to him that I would do it. And after 3 hours being briefed by Dick, I went to our offices in Belfast, I remember, and worked through the night until 8 o'clock the next morning. I gave him the chart. He was very, very thankful, I must say. And he was impressed to see that locally we were committed to the success of the project. The first time I met John Zachary Delorean was at a board meeting in this advanced factory. My employer, George Sorby Nelson Hawthorn, you got to have a great name to be involved in this. He was asked to attend with the Reynolds Architects to make our pitch for the commission to design and manage the construction of the factory. Delorean was a tall, as you know, charismatic figure. And I thought he was a bit like Jimmy Stewart, the great film star. And John always traveled first class. He flew backwards and forwards to the factory from US of A on Concorde. And he stayed for the duration in the Claridge's Hotel in London and flew over in his helicopter for meetings in Northern Ireland. Claridge's Hotel in London, Spencer Tracy, the famous film star, once famously said, when I die, I don't want to go to heaven. I want to go to Claridge's. Give you some idea, the class of the place. Anyway, John never stayed an evening in Northern Ireland. I think he might have been quite concerned about the troubled times that we were having there at the time. My employer was also tall and charismatic fellow. He was more like a James Bond with a slightly Scottish accent. He wore dark, stylish three-piece suits and a gold watch across his waistcoat. He was old school and he was solid and dependable. The Reynolds architects, on the other hand, they were cool dudes. They had monogrammed shirts and they were pretty laid back, you know. Before the board meeting, a tentative arrangement had been made that the Reynolds architects would be they would design and manage the construction of the factory, and our firm, Brodie and Hawthorn Architects, would carry out the boring menial tasks that the Reynolds architects didn't really want to do. But after the board meeting, when George Sorby Nelson Hawthorn presented my drawings to John Delorean and his board, John, my employer, he baited the Reynolds architects to such an extent that they lost their temper during the meeting and made some foolish remarks. John Delorean said they were being asinine. John said that a lot about a lot of things. He was famous for that. Anyway, we were given the commission, and the Reynolds architects weren't heard of again. So the second person I worked very closely with was Dick Hollinshead. Dick was a bit of a character. He was like John Wayne with attitude and cowboy boots. He wore his helmet at a jaunty angle. I think Dick at first thought that we in Northern Ireland were just country boys. And I must say, I first thought that he was a loud, brash American. But however, we worked with each other almost every day and grew to respect each other's commitment to do a good job and produce a bespoke, efficient factory to build the car in. I'll always remember the first meeting between DMC personnel and the professional design team. There were about 30 people at the meeting, and the conference was headed up by my employer, George Sorby Nelson Hawthorn. He was chairing the meeting, and I was asked to take the minutes. It was tricky enough because they were all new people, and I didn't know who they were, and I had to find out their name and what their position was in each of the places where they worked. So I thought, let's get a sheet of paper and send it around, and they'll write it down. That's where Dick Hollinshead came in and said, "Shit, Jerry." He said that an awful lot. "Shit, Jerry, we don't have time for that. We've got a factory to build." So that was the way it started off. And later that day, I rang Dick and said, "Look, Dick, I'm writing the minutes here. I got to write down, what do you do in DMC? What is your position?" Well, he thought for a minute and he said, "I'm an ass shifter, Jerry. I shift ass." So he put the phone down. So I described him like that on the official minutes, and they were widely distributed. I nearly lost my job over that, but Dick laughed a lot and I enjoyed it very much. I have many more stories to tell about Dick Hollinshead and the incidents that occurred in the construction of the factory. I have those in my memoirs. The company was still finalizing the design of the DMC-12 and the production lines as to how they were going to build the car while the building of the factory was in progress. And that put a lot of onus on Dick and I, because he had to talk to his people, find out nearly on an hourly basis what was happening, uh, estimate whether it was going to be affecting the design of the factory in any way. Uh, Meeting with me, we discussed it. If the changes were logical and required, I would direct the contractor to do whatever was required. So we finally got the building finished, ready to make the cars. That was a very stressful time, I must say. It's well documented that elsewhere that after 2 years and the production of 9,000 cars, that DMC went into liquidation. For 20 years after the closure of the factory, I forgot all about the Delorean car factory until an amazing thing happened when I was working for another firm called Building Design Partnership. One afternoon, I noticed there was a project meeting in the glass wall conference room beside where I worked, and to my amazement, I saw that they were studying the drawings of the Delorean factory. It transpired that BDP had secured a commission from Bombardier to develop the site, including joining together the main buildings to provide a suitable facility to build components and sub-assemblies for the wings of their very successful Airbus airplanes. When my employer became aware of my knowledge of the existing buildings, I was given the task of designing the facility for Bombardier. The history of the site is that it was taken over then after Bombardier was taken over by Montepay, and then currently it's run by a firm called Linamar Light Metal Belfast Limited, and they make aluminum castings, um, specialized components like cylinder heads, uh, supplying motor car manufacturers internationally. Linamar have, over the past few years, allowed volunteer DMC 12 owners to clear the track of undergrowth and detritus, and they've allowed them to organize Delorean owner meetings at the site and to use the track. The next meeting scheduled is 2026 on Saturday, 13th of June. I understand it. There'll be 130 DeLorean cars, and it will probably be the largest, excuse me, the largest number of DeLorean cars together since the factory closed in '82. And I think all the tickets are sold. In fact, they were sold very, very quickly. After the Bombardier project, I forgot about the DeLorean car factory for another 20 years. You can tell how old I am. Until one day, my youngest daughter, Sarah, arranged a surprise visit for us to visit the site and have a drive round the test track in a DMC 12, which sounded very inviting. She was going to pay, and everything was going to be a treat. And when we arrived at the factory gates, the security man informed us that it was oversubscribed and we weren't allowed in. My daughter had a word with him and said, "My daddy designed this, and he designed a test track. You have to let him in." Well, he made a few phone calls, and the next thing that happened was we were allowed in free of charge, and arrangements were quickly made to drive us round the track, and we were treated like celebrities. I was amazed when several DMC 12 owners wanted to have the photograph taken with me. I think it was at that moment that I realized that I had been involved in something very special that meant so much to so many people. You may be interested in some Delorean memorabilia I have. I've put together 10 sets of my drawings and memoirs, and each set has got 3 signed A3 presentation copies of the original drawings. The first drawing is the initial concept drawing, which was the birth of the DeLorean car factory, referred to in my memoirs. The working plan is the second drawing showing the layout of the factory, the test track, and all the utilities. And the third is the elevations of the building. These were the first images that John Zachary saw of the factory that would realize his dreams. Together with an A4 sized copy of the DeLorean project, which are my personal memoirs of the design and management of the factory. Only 10 sets remain of these, and each has been packed in a waterproof envelope with a thin plywood stiffening board so that when they're posted or transported, that they will arrive in pristine condition wherever they're going around the world. To date, 3 sets have gone to museum archives. 3 have been bought by an American, Spanish, and a Danish DeLorean DMC 12 car owners at the DeMurray meeting in 2024. There will be no further copies of these ever made. Should you wish to acquire some of these, please get in touch with me by email. Anyway, I'd like to thank you all for listening to me. It's been an honor to be asked and a pleasure to be your guest speaker. I'm only sorry I'm not there with you. If you have any questions, I'll do my very best to answer them. No, I joined 10 years earlier. I joined Hawthorn office, and I started off. I did quite a number of these standard factories, and then I was asked to design a galvanizing plant, and we went on a tour around England and checked out all the requirements for that. It was quite a complicated issue, actually. I don't know if you've ever been to a galvanizing plant before, but there's a lot going on, and there's molten zinc, at some huge temperatures, a lot of services and stuff I've got to get together. And then there was a rolling mill, which is basically a toilet roll made of steel, and they roll it out flat, and they cut it to lengths, that kind of thing, And there was a shot blasting part of that where they blasted rusting metal and cleaned it all up. But I'd done a lot of hospitals and private houses and stuff like that, It's really a matter of being professional enough to ask the right questions, get the information together before designing any of the factories, For this factory, it was done so quickly that I have to tell you this, I didn't go out to see car factories, but my employer, my boss, he got all the information about what was required for the factory from the Reynolds architects. They did the initial scoping of what was required, etc. And I was able to absorb that before I started to design the factory. Anything else?
Did you have to do anything different from a normal factory to take into account the TELUS carriers?
Oh yes, oh yes. The original layout was done, and then the car was not finally designed until halfway through the building process. So when they decided to take those or use those that method of production, we had to rearrange the internals. And because once we got the basic structure down, uh, we only could work on the internals. Although there was an emissions building asked for very late in the contract, and that was connected up to the initial design. Additional expenditure had to be ratified by the government because it's such an interest in it. So they had to get all the minutes of every meeting, every change, every architect's instruction. But that was a variation to the original instructions given to the building contractor. In fact, the job was so big that the two major building contractors in Northern Ireland had to legally join each other and pool their resources so that they could get it done quickly on time with a sufficient workforce and enough money to back it up to get it moving. They responded very quickly and very well. I really don't think that they would have got. I'm biased, of course, because I think the work ethic in Northern Ireland people um, helped to get that thing done in time. I don't think he'd have got that anywhere else. I mean, I can't imagine him going to Puerto Rico and all the laid back guys trying to build a factory in a very quick time. And I think many American companies are coming to Belfast in Northern Ireland now. And I think they recognize that it's in the nature of Northern Irish people to have a good work ethic. No more
So,
questions? Enjoy the rest of your evening.